Well, it looks like there's going to be an early general election in Britain. The government are going to scrap the ill-fated and foolish Fixed-Term Parliaments Act. Next week it will go through Parliament just like that. It hasn't a friend in the world, although the House of Commons was unanimous for it when it was passed. And having cleared that obstacle, what remains to stop Boris Johnson calling an early general election? Certainly not the performance of the leader of the opposition. Boris Johnson, if he calls a khaki election, re-elect me as Winston Churchill revisited, will sweep the boards, he will sweep the country, and the Conservatives will be in for another long 4 or 5 year term. No doubt that will come up in the course of the show, as will Boris Johnson's abject performance in the United Arab Emirates in the last few days. He was in Dubai on his knees in front of the royal dictatorship there, begging them for more oil production. They didn't tell him, or did they, that P&O, a Dubai-owned firm that operates many British ferry services, including the lucrative ferry service across the English Channel, was the very next day going to sack its entire workforce and hire agency labour at knockdown prices with no conditions the very next day at 2 hours' notice. The workers, many of whom had worked there for decades, were given 2 hours to get off the ship. If it had been in France, the crew would have taken over the ship in an act of righteous piracy. Some of the ships would be on fire in the English Channel right now, and the workers would be in command of all P&O's vessels. But the British workforce are not French. Or are they? Are they getting there? Will the British trade unions rise up and defend what is the most egregious and large-scale fire and rehire operation since the British Labour Party sacked all of its workers and rehired agency workers in their place? I'm not making that up. One of many reasons why Keir Starmer will be no more just a week or so after a British general election, which I confidently now expect this year, maybe even in the summer of this year. But the main burden of my remarks are, as I signalled at the beginning, Salem went intergalactic when the Space Foundation excised the name of Yuri Gagarin from the annals of interplanetary travel. This brave and beautiful man, who died in 1968, had to be airbrushed from the annals of the space age because when he was alive in 1968, he was Russian. This on top of the cancelling of Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky and Chinese cats and Sergei and Alexander and their little child Oleg and the dancers from Come Dance With Me and Formula One drivers and brilliant lawn tennis players, and I could go on and on and on, is a sign of the madness to which the so-called Western world, in truth the periphery of Eurasia, where 10% of the people of the world live and only 3% of the world's children live, has gone completely mad. I stopped at a motorway service station today where, quite surprisingly, they've never done it for any other cause or any other war or any other victims, the forecourt had been taken over by people waving large Ukrainian flags. And a group of the local Rotary Club were collecting money in buckets. Even though hundreds of millions of pounds have been donated in cash to the people of Ukraine, houses have been opened all over Europe for them, Householders rewarded far more richly than you'd get for opening your house to a homeless British veteran on the streets, because you'd get nothing for that, despite the fact that tens of billions of pounds have been transferred from the taxpayers in the United States and in Europe to the Ukrainian treasury. There was a group of old buffers collecting money in buckets. I stood watching them for 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, precisely 2 people put money in the bucket. So maybe the public is showing more sense than the authorities, the football authorities, the television channels, the newspapers, the government, the opposition. All of the organs of the British state have erupted in a frenzy of war propaganda, a kind of war psychosis that has not been seen in this country for the best part of 40 years. And I'll come back to that number because I have a different view to some as to why that is the case. But the war propaganda, the cancellation, deplatforming, the defenestration, the sackings, the complete veil of secrecy which has descended over the war in Ukraine, so that the official organs can seek to persuade you that Ukraine is winning the war. If only we'll give them more mercenaries, more money, more weapons, Russia will be defeated in the war, is serving nobody's interest, not the taxpayer in the West, not the general public who have a right to know what is happening in the world, and certainly not the Ukrainians, because the truth is, of course, the precise opposite. If Russia had wanted to end this war in the way that Britain and the United States ended the war they launched 19 years ago this very day, I refer, of course, to shock and awe in Iraq, well, already 200,000 or 300,000 civilians would be dead. There would be scarcely a building left standing. Neither of these two things is true in Ukraine, though how could you know? Because you have been forbidden to see what is actually happening. What you're getting instead is hoax stories and hoax pictures. Pictures from Belgrade, which are said to be from Kharkov. Pictures from Beirut, which are said to be from Lviv. Pictures from anywhere in the world, Baghdad, Yugoslavia, anywhere in the world that we have been at war in the last 20 years are shown to you as pictures from the war in Ukraine, but they are not. And one day you will know the truth, but they want to stop you from knowing the truth for as long as possible to continue this gigantic psyops that they have led you over the cliff as a result of. The truth is that if Russia wanted to end the war, it would already have been ended. Russia does not want to occupy the great cities of Ukraine. It does not want to massacre the civilian population of Ukraine. They were once, for hundreds of years, the same country. Russia has limited war aims, or it did at the start of the war. The longer the war goes on, the more the danger that the war aims will have to begin to change. But the limited demands, as Lavrov put it, were merely for the recognition of the eastern part of the country, the Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian part of the country, to have autonomy. They could have remained within the state of Ukraine. All they wanted was autonomy. Ukraine signed that. France and Germany guaranteed it. The Security Council guaranteed it. All they wanted was for the people of the eastern part of Ukraine not to be slowly massacred, as they have been over the last 8 years. 14,000 of them have been massacred. People constantly say to me, Why aren't you trying to stop the war? I've been trying to stop the war for the last 8 years, when most people had averted their eyes away. Most people didn't give a toss because they were the wrong kind of Ukrainians that they were slaughtering there. The black hundreds of the fascist Nazi militias and battalions of the official Ukrainian army that we are arming and funding and propagandizing for were crucifying people, burning them at the stake, torturing people, seizing people as human shields, taking whole villages, towns, even cities like Mariupol hostage, so that their power and their ability to wage a war of attrition against millions of Ukrainians who didn't think like them about the coup in 2014, organized to the nth degree by the United States of America and the European Union, so that they could continue their killing fields in the east of Ukraine. That's all that Russia demanded at the start of the war. And now they are very comfortably in a position to make sure that all of these things happen. As a matter of fact, they're in a position to close the pincer and create a giant cauldron where 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers will have no choice but to surrender, leaving the far west of the country, beyond the river Dnieper, unable to resist any Russian action that took place thereafter. Unless, of course, World War III is going to start and NATO moves in. Well, I don't know anyone the terms being either agreed or imposed. The weapons that we're pouring into Ukraine now will shortly be in the hands of the Russian armed forces. Where's the sense in that? Unless it is your intention to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. The people of Ukraine are being cruelly abused by NATO, for NATO, read the United States of America, who are using them as cannon fodder in a war that can, as I say, only end one way. What of the United States of America? Well, in the run-up to the presidential election, allegedly won by Joe Biden by a handsome margin, a story emerged which polling suggests would have altered the outcome by a clear 10% of the vote or more, which would have meant that Donald Trump was the president of the United States now, and not the quite evidently senile Alzheimer patient Joe Biden. What was that story? That story was that a laptop unbelievably left in a repair shop by the first son of the President of the United States, Hunter Biden is his name, had contained material on it so horrific that Hunter Biden should be in a penitentiary for the rest of his life. The first son of the United States of America is revealed in that laptop as a sick pervert with a taste in child pornography. He is revealed as a sick drug addict, addicted to crack cocaine. So much, so bad. You could say his father's not responsible for the sick practices of his son. But there's other stuff on the laptop too. You see, Hunter Biden was not just up to his neck in vice and Class A drugs. He was up to his neck in business in Ukraine, in Burisma, the oil and gas company in Ukraine, which is where this whole sordid story of the Ukraine begins. People don't want you to know that. They moved mountains to make sure that you did not know that. They banned the newspapers who uncovered the story. They deplatformed them. They took them off Twitter, off Facebook. 51 intelligence officers of the United States, 51, testified that this laptop story was Russian disinformation. That the big guy referred to in documents on the laptop, who had to be satisfied financially in the negotiations between Hunter Biden and the oligarchs of Ukraine. The big guy could not have been the Vice President of the United States, as was Joe Biden, when the coup that overthrew the elected government in Kiev took place. The big guy couldn't have been Joe. Hunter couldn't have been the guy extorting millions of dollars from the oligarchy in Ukraine. This was all Russian disinformation until it wasn't. The New York Times this week published a story epochal in its importance, in which they finally confessed that the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story had been wrong, that the material on the laptop had been authentic, that Hunter Biden was a sick sexual criminal, drug addict, and up to his neck in corruption in the Ukraine, and that the whole sick story of the coup and everything that has happened since was ineluctably, inextricably linked to what must now be called the Biden crime family. I've got to tell you that if Americans knew, as they will, slowly but surely, that Donald Trump had been right when he said, Joe Biden is a criminal, and you, the news media, are also criminals for failing to report it. Donald Trump was right. Imagine that. Trump, a passing stranger with the truth. Trump himself, hardly a paragon of virtue either on the sexual front or on the corruption front. Donald Trump was the one telling the truth. The Bidens, who gave you their word as a Biden, were lying. The intelligence community was lying. The deep state in the United States was lying. The Democrats were lying. CNN was lying. The media was lying, and Donald Trump was telling the truth. Just imagine if that story in the run-up to the presidential election had not been suppressed, how different the world would look today.